Greetings, I'm Demonac, and it's Hearthstone time. I'm back with part 2 of the Grand Tournament cards post-release preview. Yes, that makes no sense. Where I talk myself hoarse going through all the new cards that are available. We are in Grand Tournament only crafting so we can see all the cards, because of course most of them I don't have. Let's take a look at Shaman here. So, Shaman got a card drawing card, which doesn't hurt, because previously they just had totems and stuff. It was weird. 2 mana, draw 2 cards with an overload of 2. I'm not saying it's a bad card, because again, it's relative to your class. Having a card to draw cards is good, and it does cost less up front, so there's more chance you could get something that you can use right away. But the overload does make this hurt when you compare it to one of the 3 mana draw 2 cards ones. Like, Mage just has flat out that. The Priest gets 2 cards out from your opponent's actual deck. The Rogue now gets 2 cards, random cards made up from your opponent's class. All different ways of getting 2 cards for 3 mana. This is 2 cards for 4 mana, except that you can use them right away a little bit more. Unless you have, there is some stuff that benefits from overload. You could try and take advantage of that, but it hurts a little. The Totem Golem... Oh, I didn't zoom in on the card, sorry. I see. The Totem Golem is a death machine, I think. Haven't seen him in practice. Again, this stuff's all really new, but, when I think of, Rushdown, 3/4 for 2 are amazing stats, and his drawback... Overload sucks, okay? Overload really sucks early in the game. It does hurt. You cannot pretend it is not a disadvantage. It's always a bigger disadvantage when you actually play than you think it will be because of the way it messes up your tempo and your casting cost curve and all that stuff. But 3/4 for 2 is big enough. He's got a reasonable chance to survive. And if you coin him out first turn, there are very few ways your opponent can kill him before he can do something. So, first turn you coin him out, second turn you're only going to have 1 mana. But almost any minion they put out on their first turn, it's not going to be able to take him. He's going to get to go again and kill their minion, or do 3 damage to them and be at full health, or something. They're going to have to spend a bunch of effort to get rid of him. Really rough. And now, in the mid-game, that overload probably hurts you. Although, he's very cheap, so you start getting into that, overload debt cycle, where you're like, oh man, because I overloaded for 1 last turn, I can't cast good stuff. He's so cheap and efficient for the cost, you're still getting a decent minion. If you had to first turn Lightning Bolt, or if you had to second turn Crackle, for example, and second turn Crackle, third turn you only have 2 mana, he's still a perfectly good play third turn. You're like, okay, except that you're carrying your debt forward, and a bad payday, a payday loan place. The bad qualifier is unnecessary. Like a payday loan place, that is bad news when you start digging yourself into a hole that you never get out of. But, that's 3/4 for 2 mana is awesome. I think he's very good. Elemental Destruction, so this is the big Crackle. Oh, sorry, no. This is the big Lightning Storm. It's just like Lightning Storm, but big. Lightning Storm costs you 2 with an overload of 3, and it deals 2 damage plus 50-50 chance of 1 more damage. For 1 more mana up front, this deals 4 damage with a 50-50 chance of 1 more damage. This is more damaging than Firestorm. Flame Strike. I always call it Firestorm. It's like D&D-ness. This is more powerful than Flame Strike for 3 mana up front. So, in that way it's awesome, though, because being able to Flame Strike that much earlier in the game can help to counter some kind of ridiculous, insane combo start that somebody else gets. And you're like, how could I ever defeat this? Oh yeah, pay 3 mana? But that 5 overload, if you play this early in the game, you are actually just losing your next turn. Your minions in play might be able to do something. Maybe you have a weapon, but you will not cast anything on your next turn if you play this turn 3 or turn 4. I mean, if you coined this out turn 2, how was there enough enemy stuff out there to be worth losing 2 turns? I don't know. But even later in the game, when your opponent's got casting Flame Strike for 7 and you're playing this, it costs you 8 mana over 2 turns. That second turn when you're losing 4 mana, that's horrible. But if your hand was empty, there's a, depending on your deck, there's a reasonable chance whatever card you draw was going to cost 5 mana or less. So maybe it's not as bad. But the real thing is, you can use, when it only costs 3 mana up front, you can use this to seal the deal when you have a bunch of stuff in play, or you've just played a bunch of stuff. So whereas they're playing Flame Strike, and they only have 3 mana left to work with to put out, like if they had nothing and they're Flame Striking to clear the board, they can only put out a 3 mana worth of things at most. Whereas if you had nothing and your opponent had a whole army of stuff, you can blow up their whole army and play 7 mana worth of stuff now. Now, that 7 mana worth of stuff has to last you through next turn, but this is very powerful, so no complaints about that card. It is really messed up how it's going to work in practice, but it's still always going to be very powerful and effective card. Healing Wave, I don't know if I can say the same thing. I mean, it pays 3 mana, it's a 7-point heal. Now, if you're using it on a minion, 7-point heal is pretty good, I guess. If you had a minion that had taken 5 or more damage and was still alive, it's probably worth healing it for 7. This also has like the joust thing built in, and if you win the joust, if you reveal a minion that costs more than your opponent, it restores 14 instead. At which point there's probably no way that's helping on a minion. That's more if you're just health boosting yourself. This can give you a ton of health. I mean, I guess this is just flat out better than the Druid one, right? Druid pays 3 and gets 8. There is no way this is not better. Because on a minion, how often do you need that 8th hit point? Virtually never. And even if you did, there's a 50-50 chance this will full heal them. But if you're using it on yourself, you would much rather have 7 health with a 50-50 chance for 7 more than 8 health always. A 50-50 chance for 7 health, I'm against random stuff, but a 50-50 chance for 7 health is worth way more than a guaranteed 1 health. Just way more, especially when the card is already, is not like 1 versus 7, it's like 7 versus 8. Anyway, yeah, so that's a very powerful healing card if you care about that, but The Tuskar Totemic is weird, right? So for 3 mana, you get a 3/2, not great, and you get a random totem. It says any. I think the implication is that like when you use your totem ability, it will only give you a totem that you don't already have. I think the implication with the capitalized any is that he could give you a second spell damage totem if you already had a spell damage totem out. He could give you a second taunt totem. So when you look at it, he's giving you 5 plus 2 from the totem. So he's giving you 7 points worth of stats for 3 mana, right? Like getting a 3/4. But he's more fragile. You don't know what you get. You do get whatever ability a totem has, and a lot of them have good abilities. If he gets the 1/1, it's really sad. It was like a 4/3 for 3. So I don't know. The only reason that he's not bad, I guess, is because there are a bunch of things that boost totems. There's at least one new one. I think there are a couple of new ones. I don't know. He does not seem great to me though. He's one of those common cards that like, oh, we need more cards in the set. What can we do? Sort of common card. I don't think he's fulfilling any particularly strong purpose. If he was a 3/3, he'd be awesome. I'm guessing maybe they play tested and found that at 3/3 he was maybe too strong. I don't know. We have the Charged Hammer. So there's a 2-attack hammer with 4 uses. It costs 4. His death rattle is your hero power becomes deal 2 damage. So it's a little double-edged, which is funny because it's a blunt weapon. When you use this thing up, you will lose the ability to make totems. Completely. But instead of that, you will get a friggin' awesome hero ability. Like, ridiculously awesome. And if you look at the way, how is it working out? If for some reason your opponent was not spaying, neutering, and helping control the totem population, this thing gives you enough time. Like, you have to use it the 4 times before it triggers the death rattle, right? This gives you lots of time to get out totems, and then, well, I can't make any more totems if I have all 4 different ones. Oh, now I'm a super mage. I don't know. This is a very cool weapon, though. The fact is, 2 attack, 4 uses, not great for 4 mana, but it's really not that bad, even without the ability. Which is kind of the idea, because I think the idea is the ability is a little bit double-edged, too. But it's not that bad to get that many swings with it for the card and the mana. The mana is a little more than you want to pay, but it would be too cheap at 3, right? So, not too bad. And then when your hero power becomes just deal 2 damage, that is awesome. So here we have the Drene Totem Carver, who 4/4 for 4, she gets +1/+1 for each friendly totem. So if you could get a couple totems in there, and that's one of the things where the totemic comes in, right? If you went turn 2, make a totem with your ability. Turn 3, totemic. You now have 2 totems. Turn 4, play her, she's a 6/6. This sequence of events will almost never happen. But as long as you have at least one other totem out, you're getting a 5/5 for 4. Say it's your 6 mana turn, you have nothing on the board. You can make a totem for 2 mana, and then you play her and you get a 5/5. That was a pretty good use of 6 mana. Getting a totem, most of which have good abilities. At least one of those abilities is almost certainly useful to you at any given time. Probably not the one you get, but that's how it is. You get a 5/5 for 4, it's pretty good. I feel like there's some other things in the set that are similar but better, but that's pretty solid. Again, you're going to get a 5/5 for 4. She'll work out fine, but not super exciting, you know? Thunderbluff Valiant. Well, here's some more totem love. They're like really fixated on the totems. So he's a 3/6 for 5, which is he's tough. I'm not a big fan of 3/6 for 5. He's got to have like a good ability, but he's got a pretty good ability because his ability is when you inspire, when you use your hero ability, it gives your totems +2 attack. That doesn't say until end of turn. Suddenly your totems are turning into like a death army, and if they stick around for several turns, that could get nuts. And he's tough enough that your opponent really wants to kill him, but it's not that easy. So he's actually got a good mix of stats for what he is. Very interesting sort of bloodlusty guy. And then they have the Mistcaller as their legend. So he's a 4/4 for 6. His battlecry gives +1/+1 to all minions in your hand and deck, not your minions in play. He's like, screw those guys. They had their chance. No, he's looking to the future. And the future is +1/+1 for everything in the future, not the present. No, he's really like, he's weird. I was discussing him with Quill18 as well. Quill18 is not a fan of what he does for your tempo. Over the long term, this guy obviously pays for himself. And if you just go pure by the math, for 6 mana, you probably would have gotten about a 6/6, right? Normal type, with a normal type of guy. Or say a 6/7, whatever. So, you play him right now, and you only get a 4/4. You got gypped out, you got ripped off for, 4 or 5 points worth of stats. But if next turn you play a minion or 2 minions, each of those is getting +1/+1, you basically made up the difference. So after 2 turns, right, say you play 1 minion each turn, after 2 turns, you are clearly gaining from what he has done. He's just like, all your stuff is more efficient and awesome, but in that meantime, like, that's like, you're collecting interest on this investment, but in the meantime, your opponent may have been beating you up because you spent your valuable 6 mana turn on a 4/4. Once he's in play, he's just a 4/4. He's not doing anything much for you. He can die. It's not even that big a deal if he does, because he's already done his thing. He's very interesting. It's a very cool ability. How good it is in practice, I'm not sure. I don't know what combos you would use with that. All the things you normally use, there's like, oh, I'm going to get like a ton of minions and give them all +1/+1. Those combos don't work with him, because he is giving the minion cards in your deck +1/+1. So if you play with the spider, right, it's going to come out as a 2/3 for 2, with Death Rattle get 2 1/1s. But when a Death Rattle goes off, you're still just getting 1/1s. Those were generated by an ability, not the card. If you play the Wolf spell, the Shaman Wolf spell, you get 2/2/3 wolves for 3, and the Overload. They're still going to be 2/3. They're not getting +1/+1 because the card wasn't a minion. The card was a spell that makes 2 minions. So all the things you would normally do to get more advantage out of a blanket buff to your minions don't work the same with him. On the other hand, everything you play after him is just so much more efficient for the cost. I don't know. So over here in Warlocks, we have Demon Fuse. Not a fan. 2 mana to give a demon only +3/+3. So you're like, yay. And it gives your opponent a mana crystal. So think about that. For the same cost, you could get a card that doesn't give your opponent a mana crystal, gives any demon +2/+2, gives any friendly demon +2/+2, or deals 2 damage to any other minion. That's so much better, and people aren't that fond of that card. It's actually getting better as they put out more demons. This is just so much worse than whatever it's called. Demon whatever. The one that's the same cost that gives +2/+2 to a friendly demon, or deals 2 damage to a minion, and doesn't give your opponent a mana crystal, is so much better than this. I don't even know why they printed it. Then there's the Tiny Knight of Evil. He is a 3/2 for 2. So he can't be that bad, because he's a 3/2 for 2, right? He has no drawback, which is nice for a demon. Don't see that every day. He's not a legend or anything. The name makes him sound legendary. He's not. Whenever you discard a card, he gets +1/+1. So he takes something that is a horrible disadvantage, and he doesn't turn into an advantage exactly, because you're still losing a card. That still hurts, but he's cushioning the drawback by getting bigger every time you do that. So if you have the Tiny Knight of Evil out and able to attack, when you Soulfire your opponent, which now costs 1, right? If you've been missing a couple patches, it was awesome when it cost 0, it was too awesome when it cost 0, they made it cost 1, then nobody played it, because they also made Dark Bomb. But now, you pay 1 mana and discard a card to deal 4 damage, you're also giving him +1/+1 permanently, as long as he's alive. That's pretty good. If you play a Doomguard and you actually had 2 cards to discard to it, he's getting +2/+2. This guy is suddenly a 5/4 that you paid 2 mana for originally. So, how many cards are the discard cards? How many of them are worth it? Because Succubus is not worth it. Is the Succubus worth it if you have this guy? I don't know. Interesting. He's pretty cool, though. He can't be bad. I'm just not sure if he's that good. Now, the Wrathguard, when I first saw this guy, I was like, this guy is clearly just a better Succubus. Suck that, Succubus. But anyway, as I had the option, as I saw him, in a pack or something, I started talking through it, and I realized he's not really a better Succubus. I think the Succubus might actually be a better Succubus, which is pretty sad, because I'm not too fond of the Succubus. But, just like the Succubus, you get a 4/3 demon for 2. So far, so good. The Succubus is she makes you discard a card at random from your hand. That's bad. So bad. Now, technically, in a rush roll, early in the game, you coin her out first turn, or if you just play her on second turn. Losing a card hurts, but you had a number of cards at that point. You're going to draw more cards, and you're a Warlock. You can get more cards without too much trouble. So, running out of cards isn't so much an issue, and that makes discarding a card less horrible than it would be, but it's still, to get a 4/3 for 2, when you could already get a 3/2 for 2 with a big advantage. A 4/3 with a disadvantage for 2 is not great. Discarding a card is a pretty harsh disadvantage. Well, the Wrathguard, instead of discarding a card, he just comes out, and whenever he takes damage, that amount of damage is also dealt to you. And that sounded better to me at first. It's just some damage, it's not a card. But first off, a card is worth 2 hit points. You're going to take more than 2 hit points by the time he's dead. So that's one strike against him. The Flame Imp, who I don't like, is a 3/2 for 1, who does 3 damage to your hero. At least the Flame Imp will never do more than 3 damage to your hero. And 3-2 for 1 is kind of better than a 4-3 for 2, because his stats are not arranged well. If he was a 3-4, then I would say he's clearly better than the Flame Imp. Or at least you can't argue that he's worse than the Flame Imp. At 4-3, I can argue that he's worse than the Flame Imp. He costs 1 more mana for +1/+1, and his drawback is worse. It doesn't do the damage to you right away. I guess maybe if you can keep your opponent's side of the board clear, maybe he will never do the damage back to you. That's really unlikely. More likely is your opponent is trying to decide, do I kill your minion or do I fireball you in the face? Oh wait, I can fireball your minion in your face. Take 6 and your guy's dead. There's also a new card called Lava Lance. 5 mana, 8 damage to minions only. Well, it was minions only. You played a Wrathguard, you get the Lava Lance. So his drawback is not horrible early in the game. You're probably going to take 3 or 4 damage, but he's not that good for it. I mean, he's not that much bigger than a normal minion you get for the cost. He's just as fragile. Like, you can get a 2-3 for 2 who has a crazy good advantage. So getting a 4-3 for 2 who has a crazy bad disadvantage, not a great deal because he's going to die just as easily. But later in the game, his drawback becomes horrific, because you could get Lava Lance. He could get hit by a Boulder Fist Ogre, which does 6 damage, right? And he kills this and tramples through to you for 6. It's worse than Trample, because in Magic the Gathering, Trample, a 6 damage Trample minion hitting this guy would only do 3 damage to you, because it would have absorbed 3 killing him. No, you would take the full 6 damage if he gets hit for 6. But, the thing is, the Succubus in the late game sometimes has no disadvantage. If you can empty your hand, which, if you play your other cards first, she's only 2 more mana, so you might be able to play your other card, and then play her. If you have no cards, nothing to discard, she's free. So, actually, once going over the details, I think he is just flat out worse than the Succubus, with the minor exception that you can silence him. And it seems, I'm only mentioning that because it seems intentional, because there's a neutral minion that is a 4-3 for 3 who has a battle cry, silence a demon. Specifically demons. He hoses demons, but he's a neutral minion that you could play who, like, you go second turn Wrathguard, third turn silence Wrathguard, have 2 4-3s, one of which can attack. So that's the obvious. There needs to be a word for combos that are almost like just explicit. Like, they printed this card to work with this card. There needs to be like a separate form of word to describe combos. If you have an idea for it, let me know in the comments. Combos that are explicit or might as well be. So if there was a guy who said, if you have Wrathguard in play, this guy gets +2/+2. That would be an explicit combo. It's not like you thought, oh, these two things would go well together. No, it said on the card. But similar to that, I think I would group together when they print 2 guys in expansion that are like obviously buddies. Like, it's so obvious that these 2 cards were meant to work together, whether or not it's actually good. Like, this guy and the guy who costs 1 more has the same stats and would remove his disadvantage. Anyway. Moving on. Fist of Jaraxxus is a pretty awesome, fun card. In terms of reducing or mitigating the drawback of discarding, this guy can potentially totally negate the drawback of discarding, if you're lucky or if you manage to arrange your hand correctly. So it's 4 mana, deal 4 damage to a random enemy. So that could waste his 4 damage on the enemy hero. Again, if you're just trying to burn down the enemy hero, that's fine. 4 damage for 4 is not efficient, but it's not bad. It's worth a card, right? You have a card that deals 4 damage. That's pretty worthwhile. The fact that it's random is poor. But it says when you play or discard this. That's right. This card still works even if you discard it. That's why it's random, because they don't like you to have to ever make more than one choice on a single card, right? No card ever has 2 targets that you choose. No card ever, nothing is like you play this and then you choose and discard a card. They want you playing a card to just be one action. So nothing ever targets more than once. If it was going to target more than one thing, it does it randomly. That's Hearthstone design, to keep the game as simple and fast playing as they can. So it has to be random because you could play it without playing it. You could play it by accident as part of another play, which is actually what makes it awesome, because you go coin, succubus. Succubus makes you discard a card at random, but if you discard the fist, then you will deal 4 damage to a random enemy, either your opponent, or if they had a minion out, there's a 50-50 chance he might blow up their minion. So you got a succubus and blew up their minion. Now you're happy. And the succubus had no disadvantage, really, if it just do 4 damage to a player. So that's pretty awesome. Obviously, later in the game, with discarding things, you can arrange it. Like, if you were so fortunate as to have 2 of these in your hand, you play the other things in your hand, then you play a Doomguard. The Doomguard is going to come out as a 5/7 charge, and he's going to deal 4 damage to a random enemy twice. That is apocalyptic. It's usually not going to happen, but with Fist of Jaraxxus and a bunch of things that involve random discards from your hand, it is not difficult to arrange to cast this for free. Now, because you have to arrange it, it may not be exactly when you want, and it's random, so you don't know if it's going to work out how you want, but that is a very cool card. I approve of this card. It is cool. Is it the best card ever? I don't know, but it's very cool, interesting, will get played. I like that. Dreadsteed is weird. He's a 1/1 for 4. He does count as a demon. Hooray. Death Rattle, summon a copy of the same card. That happens right away. If you have a Dreadsteed out, and you're like, kill the Dreadsteed, get another Dreadsteed. Kill him again, get another Dreadsteed. If you have one of those, like, Void, I forget the name. If you have Void guy who eats the guys on either side of him to become bigger, you could eat a Dreadsteed and still have a Dreadsteed. Now, I mean, he's only getting +1/+1. That's a crappy combo, but it's a good demonstration of how the Dreadsteed is kind of interesting in its immortality. On the other hand, it is a 1/1 for 4. You spent 4 mana to get out this thing that is a 1/1. It will always be, well, I guess you can buff them, but if you buff it, when it dies, you're still just getting a 1/1. You're getting a basic Dreadsteed again. But that does bring up an interesting point. So first off, as my friends have pointed out, once you have the Dreadsteed out, you should be able to do 1 damage to your opponent or one of their minions every turn for the rest of the game. He's an investment in future damage. Unless somebody spends the effort to silence his butt, you are going to do 1 damage every turn with this thing, at least. If you have other, like, combos that care about demons, that's pretty good. What I find interesting is, if you have all those spells, not Demon Fuse, because it's a piece of crap, but the other spells that buff minions, like +2/+2 to a demon, or deal 2 damage to something else, +5/+5 to a demon, or deal 5 damage to something else. I mean, that's always going to be useful because they have the damage built in. But when you're playing with buffs, the drawback to them is often they are efficient for the mana because they kind of have built-in charge, right? If you just play it on a minion who can attack, instead of being like a 2/2 for 2, it's like a 2/2 charge for 2, right? The +2/+2 thing. You could think of it that way. It also makes a minion tougher, so you could heal it later, or just keep alive the minion and all the attack that it already had. But the drawback to buff spells, and what you run into it with druids all the time, is you don't play that many of them because you have to have enough minions out to buff. You have to have a target to put that buff on, preferably a target who survived your opponent's turn so that you can buff it and attack right away. That's hard to manage, but the Dreadsteed removes that drawback. Unless somebody goes out of their way to silence him, which again is probably a win, because they have to spend a silence on this guy. Unless someone goes out of their way to silence him, you will always have a target, and probably just always have a target who is able to attack on your turn. Because if he dies on the enemy turn, you get back a Dreadsteed, and then on your turn, you had it at the beginning of your turn, so it's able to attack. So you will always have a target for those buffs, so those buff spells become more valuable. Now what else do we have? Dark Bargain. 6 mana. Destroy 2 random enemy minions. Whoa. Discard 2 random cards. Discarding 2 cards hurts. But blowing up 2 random enemy minions, like, at some point it stops being as random. Because it's... How often does your opponent have more than 2 minions? Especially more than 2 that you care about. If you have anything out yourself, you can probably trade them or just not even lose them. Just like attack and kill the weak minions, and then dark bargain and blow up your opponent's 2 big minions. That's awesome. Discarding 2 random cards, pretty bad, but again, in the late game, you will often arrange it. You will often only have 1 card or sometimes no cards in your hand, and you can often work it, so you do that before you play this. Or maybe you only have 1 card left, and it's Fist of Jaraxxus, so you blow up 2 random enemy minions, and then deal 4 damage to a random enemy. Speaking of random, the Void Crusher is very interesting. So he's a 5/4 for 6. He's a little on the small side. He's still a pretty chunky minion, though. He's not like a small minion for 6. He's just not worth 6 mana for his stats. Well, he's a demon, that helps. There are a lot of things that support demons now. You can easily make a deck that is all demons that has a little bit more quality, because it used to be you had to play with a lot of crap demons to even have mostly demons in the deck. There are now enough demons that you can make a deck that is more or less all the minions are demons, and you still have some choice, so you can have actual decent card quality while doing it. So then you can play that Demon Fire card from Nox Ramus, I think. I think that's where it's from. 3 mana, deal 2 damage to all non-demons. Hello. Starts getting interesting. But the Void Crusher here, so he's a 5/4 for 6, and in his Inspire, so whenever you use your hero ability, he destroys a random minion for each player. So just using your hero power for 2 mana is going to destroy a random opponent's minion, then it'll destroy a random friendly minion. Which might be him. He could totally blow himself up. But you could put out other minions to cushion that, or you could say, first off, you could play him and immediately do that. So for 8 mana, you could be destroying a random enemy minion right away and possibly keep your 5/4. But if he was able to attack, you can attack something, like kill something with him, as long as he survives, even if he has 1 hit point left. Then you use his ability, and then if he dies, it's not as big a deal. And also, whatever he killed reduces the chances that that small minion is getting hit by his power. So hopefully he can randomly kill something bigger. So he's pretty cool and flexible. Then their legend, Wilfred Fizzlebang, is another 4/4 for 6. You play this guy, he's a 4/4 for 6. Stat-wise, he is not doing anything much for you. But he changes your... Well, he doesn't actually change your hero power exactly. Your hero power is still pay 2 mana, pay 2 life, draw a card. But as long as he's out, whatever card you draw from your hero power has a casting cost of 0. So every turn, you're still drawing a normal card at normal cost, but when you use your hero power, you're drawing a 0-cost version of a card. So if you draw Fearsome Doomguard, 6/8 for 7, no drawbacks. That's actually his superpower. He's a demon with no drawbacks. And he's big. He interacts with lots of things. For one thing, if you draw him with Wilfred Fizzlebang, you can just immediately play him for 0 mana. You can immediately play any minion for 0 mana. That is pretty hardcore. And of course, that makes a good 8 mana play, right? You play Wilfred, and then you pay the 2 mana right away, draw something, play it for free, or save it in your hand. It'll still cost 0 later, because Hearthstone can do that. This guy also, he works exceptionally well with the Void 3/4 when I die, play a minion from my hand guy. He's very good. But even 6/8 for 7, he just has extremely well-distributed large minion stats. 6/8 for 7, that is perfectly good stuff. He will fight things well. Very hard to kill. So that's pretty cool. Over in Warrior side, we have Bolster. Bolster takes your minions with Taunt, who a lot of people say are not as valuable, right? Like that Taunt is too overcosted, or just like Taunt is something you don't want to spend a lot of effort putting in your deck. Well, this gives all your Taunt minions +2/+2. Suddenly all those guys with Taunt actually become kind of death machines. +2/+2 to 2 or 3 minions for 2 mana is awesome. And Taunt's not that bad anyway, because it's an ability that takes effect right away, right? If you have a minion with charge, you can use it right away. If you have most minions, you play them, your opponent has a chance to blow them up before they can do anything other than battle cries. Well, your taunt minion, as soon as you put it into play, it is doing something. Your opponent has to go through it before they can attack your other minions. So, taunt is already worthwhile, but this makes it a whole lot better. If you have a bunch of efficient sort of taunt guys, and then, oh, by the way, even if you just have 2 guys out, 2 mana for +2/+2 on 2 minions is awesome. We have Alex Strauss's champion, who's a crazy. So 2/3 for 2. I like those stats. That's a good rush minion. Battle Cry, if you're holding a dragon, gain +1 attack and charge. Wait. So this is a condition. Okay, so it's not guaranteed. Condition is not the same as a drawback, though. Really, there is no drawback. This is a minion. It is a 3/3 charge for 2 mana with no drawback. It may sometimes be smaller and not have charge, but it's still a 2/3 for 2, which is fully acceptable. But if your deck is designed to have a bunch of dragons and do dragony stuff, 3/3 charge for 2? So, first off, even if it's just suiciding against an enemy, it's as good as that 3/1 for 3 charge guy, except the 3/1 for a 3 charge guy never survives when contact with an enemy. I guess there are 0 attack minions sometimes. He just always dies. This is a 3/3, so it can actually come out for 2 mana, kill something like it could kill a 2/3 minion, and still be alive. You only paid 2 mana for it. Having to have a dragon in your hand is a drawback. It will sometimes make you not play it when otherwise you would like to play it, or you'll play it and then you'll feel bad about your play because you only got a 2/3 and it could have been so much better. But you had to do something with your mana that turn. This thing is so strong though, it's crazy. I'm overestimating it a little. But when I first saw this, I was seriously like, this looks like those bullshit cards that the raid bosses get when you do the solo adventures. It is almost like one of their bullshit cards, but it's more balanced than that. But it's very, very strong. Although again, it's not going to go in every deck. You really have to be playing pretty heavy dragons to count on getting that early. But say you just have a normalish number of dragons. Say you have 6 to 8 cards in your deck with the dragon type. Not ridiculous. You picked ones that were good for your deck. Most of the time this will still be, or half the time this will still be a 2/3 for 2, which is a perfectly fine second turn play, or coin out on the first turn. But with those 6 to 8 dragons, there is a reasonable chance this will be a crazy, insane rush play right from the start. Plus, later in the game, there is also a chance that it will be much more valuable than a regular 2/3 for 2. So, okay, we got Sparring Partner here. He is a 3/2 for 2, which is good. He's got Taunt. That's pretty good. I mean, it's not great on a 3/2. Your 3/2, you'd usually rather they didn't attack it. Please attack something else. I would like my 3/2 to be live. But he also has Battle Cry, give a minion taunt. Which means he is really taunting up your side so you can bolster them later. Imagine this fourth turn play. You have something in play. Say it's Alex Strauss's champion. Say you got shafted. You had no dragons this game. You're like, no dragons. That sucks. You have Alex Strauss's champion out. She's a 2/3. You had some other minion that traded with your opponent. It's your turn. You have 4 mana. You go, Sparring Partner. He gives her Taunt. You now have a 3/2 Taunt and a 2/3 Taunt. Bolster. You now have a 4/5 Taunt and a 5/4 Taunt. That was insane. So, that's pretty good. Now, that's kind of ideal circumstances for him. Not even necessarily ideal circumstances for Bolster, because you could have more. Now, are you going to play with him and a ton of taunt things for Bolster? You could go overboard, because if you have too many taunt things, then he's totally a waste. If you have other tougher taunt things, his taunt's not very good, And if a lot of your deck has taunt, his battle cry of giving something taunt is likely to be wasted. You can easily have too many taunts, because if everything has taunt, as Sinestro would say, no one does. But he's pretty cool, even independent of Bolster, and then with Bolster, he seems even cooler. You have the King's Defender. It is a 3/2 weapon for 3, so it's like your Flaming War Axe, whatever it's called. But it costs 1 more. Battle Cry, if you have a minion with taunt, gain +1 durability. So it has a condition, which is not hard to meet, although, is that something you really want to prioritize? And it gives it 1 extra durability. 3 attack, 3 durability is a very good weapon for 3. The condition, I feel like, is just a little bit of a... I don't think this is a power weapon. It's fine, but I think that usually it's just going to cost more than your War Axe for no benefit, or the amount of effort that you spend in trying to design your deck to have cheap taunts may not work out. But maybe it's not for the cheap taunts. Maybe it's because you're going to use Bolster in your deck. So overall your deck has, say, 6 to 8 minions with taunt plus him, or even counting him, whatever. 6 to 8 minions. It's got about 8 minions with taunt, possibly counting him. Now, later in the game, this is more likely to be a useful weapon. On the other hand, your 3 attack weapon with 3 uses, is it that great late in the game? Because late in the game you could be playing much bigger weapons that don't cost much more mana, and it doesn't matter that they have fewer uses because they're bigger and you could have a whole bunch of them. I don't know. It's better than the crappy paladin weapon with the joust thing. That thing is trash. Bash, 3 mana, deal 3 damage, gain 3 armor. That's pretty good. 3 mana for 3 damage is just a little steep. It's not enough that it's a problem, though. This is still a perfectly viable way to kill a problem minion, especially since warriors are not as good at the direct damage part, and you can use it to burn your opponent if you want to. But it's also giving you 3 armor, so it's a 6-point swing, which makes it look really good compared to Drain Life, for example, which is 3 mana, deal 2 damage, and gain 2 life, which can't even go above your maximum. Not that you're likely to be going above your maximum from 2 life as a Warlock. But you also have a bunch of mechanics that benefit from armor. There are at least 2 or 3 different things you might actually be using. So overall, I think Bash is pretty solid. Ogrimmar Aspirant, 3/3 for 3. And when you activate your hero ability, you give your weapon +1 attack. So as long as you have a weapon out, that's pretty good. That makes it a high durability weapon, like this thing with the taunt, Battle Cry, more valuable if you're going to keep it out for longer. So that's pretty cool. Also, on Gorehowl, +1 attack means 1 more swing killing something, which is also pretty good. Although that's a late gamey sort of combo. Gorehowl doesn't necessarily need the help. And how much is this really helping Gorehowl? Overall, though, as a 3/3 for 3, his ability is quite decent. He's pretty solid too. Not like, I don't think he's blowing anyone away with how awesome he is, but he's good. Your Magnetor Alpha, a 5/3 for 4, which is, it's an okay. He's just like, you're only losing 1 point compared to most good 4 mana minions. Or actually, you're not even 5/3. That's a good stat. It's just like arranged badly. But if he hits 1 minion, he also hits the adjacent minions. So if he lives long enough to attack, he can easily kill 3 things and almost certainly die. Although, if your opponent's minions are arranged just right, so that there's a weak one in the middle, he can hit the weak one, only take the weak minion's damage, and do 5 damage to the one next to it. In fact, at that point, even if you're only splashing 1 other target, that's awesome. If you can hit the weenie, not die, and deal 5 damage to a big minion that otherwise would have killed this. Plus, if you buff him, he gets pretty sick. So he's very interesting and cool. He's pretty fragile, but yeah, he smashes. The Sea Reaver is a pretty weird guy. So he's a 6/7 for 6. He is a Boulder Fist Ogre. But when you draw him, he immediately deals 1 damage to your minions, out of your control. Only your minions, not even enemy minions. So anyone would look at that and be like, well, he's a Boulder Fist Ogre with a drawback that you can't even control. well, you're a warrior. On any other class, this would be a trash card. As a warrior, you can imagine how dealing 1 damage to your minions could do a lot of things. Hey, everyone, get in here. Obviously all the enraged stuff and stuff like that. So he's kind of interesting that way. And 6/7 for 6 is fine, as long as his 1 damage doesn't actually kill a bunch of your stuff. Their legend, Varian Rin is serious. He costs 10 mana. He is expensive. 10 mana for a 7/7. But you're not just paying 10 mana for a 7/7. You're paying 10 mana for a 7/7 who draws you 3 cards. But you're not just paying 10 mana for a 7/7 who draws you 3 cards, because if any of those cards is a minion, he just puts it directly into play. Now, it's interesting the way it's worded. It says, put any minions you drew directly into the battlefield. I don't know if they get their battle cries or not. But even if they don't, instant army, potentially. Say you are unfortunate. You pay 10 mana, you get a 7/7, you draw 3 cards, only one of them is a minion. So, you drew 2 cards and got a minion put into play for free. Maybe it was a small one. Whatever. He did fine, and he could have been amazing. So yeah, he's pretty rough. Then we finally get into the neutral cards, of which there are quite a few pages, and I'm going to go horse talking about them, but here we go. Gadgetzan Jouster. Piece of crap. Yeah, it's just crap. It is a 1/2 for 1, which is garbage. Now again, we're treating Joust as 50-50. You can definitely modify it to be more in your favor, but they're still going to be 50-50-ish. And honestly, playing a bunch of 1-cost crap minions is not helping your other Jousts in your deck. But mostly, we're just going to call it a coin flip, because it is usually going to be pretty close to a coin flip. Well, you have there's a 50-50 chance that you're getting a 1/2 for 1 with no ability, which is garbage. There's a 50-50 chance that you're getting a 2/3 for 1, which is quite good, but is not going to crush and win you the game. There are other ways to get that are reliable and probably better. Here's if you're a priest, you would much rather play Injured Kvaldir. He's a 2/4 for 1, but he's actually a 2/1 for 1, because like the Injured Blade Master, he deals a bunch of damage to himself when he comes into play. So he's a 2/1 for 1, but his max hit points are 3 higher. So as a priest, first turn you play him, he's a 2/1 for 1. Next turn, if it suits you, you can spend your 2 mana healing him. Now he's a 2/3. Now he's not really a 2/3 for 1, because you spent a whole turn doing that, and that's probably not very useful. But still, overall, you can get good use out of him, and as a 3rd turn play, you could play him and heal him if you had a Northstar Cleric out, or the Rock'em Sock'em Robot, or whatever. You could be triggering some kind of healing-based effects and get good stuff out of him. The Lowly Squire looks like a piece of crap, and he's not. I haven't seen this in practice too much, but I'm pretty sure for most classes, again, it's not as good with Warlock, because you're losing life every time you use your hero ability. That's kind of hurting. Not as good with Rogue, because you don't really want to be using your hero ability every turn, although as a 1st turn play, he actually still works just great with Rogue. But his thing is, he's a 1/2 for 1. It's crap. But if you play him 1st turn, 2nd turn, use your hero ability, right? Trigger his Inspire. Now he's a 2/2 for 1. Already with 1 use of your hero ability, he is technically, mathematically better than almost any minion you would get for 1 mana. Right? There aren't any 2/2 for 1 minions. You can get a 1/3 if it's a class minion. You can't even get a 1/3 neutral minion for 1. And he's neutral. So already he's as good as any other 1-cost minion stat-wise if you used your hero ability once. This does depend on your hero ability being one that is useful on its own. Again, as a priest, that's not as useful, because you could be healing nothing. I don't know if that counts or not. It may not even count. I haven't actually tried that out. But say you're a mage, you're a paladin, you're a shaman, you're a druid. using your hero ability, or just you're a hunter, you know, like almost anyone, using your hero ability will do whatever your hero ability does and boost him up to a 2/2. But also, if you play him first turn, then your opponent goes coin, plays a 2/3 minion. If they play a 3/2 minion, using your hero ability once would let him trade with it, take it out, and still do whatever your hero ability does. If they have a 2/3, well, he's a 2/2 now. If you're one of the classes where your ability does 1 damage, like a rogue, a mage, a druid, then you can use your ability to finish off their 2/3. That works out really well. And this is just all the very short term, like first turn, second turn, use your ability thing. The fact is, if he gets out there and you use your hero ability a couple of times, he very rapidly gets worthwhile. Like, I think he's pretty darn awesome. I like paying 1 mana for my... He's not going to grow as fast as the Microbot, and he's not a mech. Being a mech is really good. But as a potential rush guy, I feel like he works out really well, and he has some potential late game to not be totally worthless. Especially if you're actually using Inspire combos. The tournament attendee is a 2/1 taunt for 1. That's a really good set of stats. 2/1 for 1. And if your opponent plays a 3/2, not only can you trade for it, but you can also hit them for 2, and they might have to trade their guy to get through him. They'll probably find another way to do 1 damage and kill him so they don't have to, so you're probably better off trading, but I don't know. The 2/1 for 1 is good stats, just for general purpose. And the fact that he's taunt, it doesn't matter how fragile he is, that means your opponent has to do something to get rid of him. Even if you play him late game, that could waste a valuable attack or spell that they needed at just the right time and mess them up. So, 2/1 taunt for 1, pretty good. Also works well with that warrior stuff, eh? The Argent Watchman, I'm sure someone will have like a deck that uses this. It doesn't appeal to me particularly, but 2/4 for 2, so huge stats. Can't attack. Huge drawback. Inspire, can attack. So, yeah, he's kind of on the fence, right? He's big for the cost, but he's not that big for the cost that he's worth the disadvantage. But if you were going to be using your hero ability a lot, it's not that big a disadvantage. On the other hand, I'm sure there are lots of times you're going to be sitting there wishing, I just want to attack with my stupid Watchman, and I can't use my hero ability and do this other thing that I need to do, and I'm screwed. I see a lot of that in his future. But 2/4 for 2 is pretty solid. If you buff him, like, he could become very large very fast. You have 2 mana, play this guy. 3 mana, like Velen's Chosen, except he can't attack that turn. But he's huge. I don't know. Probably a good one to give taunt to, obviously. Boneguard Lieutenant is a pretty cool rush minion, right? You're 3/2 for 2. Again, good stats. There's a lot of 2/3 for 2, 3/2 for 2 stuff in this set. Tons of it. In fact, it's at the point where if your stats are worse than that for 2 mana, you better do something really impressive. But you're 3/2 for 2. Every time you use your hero ability, he gains 1 health. So he potentially has some staying power, right? I mean, in a very early game, going from 3/2 to 3/3 is only going to help him in a few select matchups. I mean, if you coin him out, your opponent plays a 2/3, you can just use your hero ability. He gets enough health to survive. You kill their guy, do whatever your hero ability does. That's pretty cool. That's a good matchup for him. That'll happen sometimes. But the other thing is just, if your opponent doesn't kill him and he sits around and you use your hero ability fairly regularly, he's going to keep regenerating, or he's going to keep getting tougher as it goes on. So it might actually take a disproportionate amount of effort to get rid of him. And the investment to play him is very low. And if you're going to use your hero ability anyway, it's pretty cool. Flame Juggler, he's another one. He helps win some of those early exchanges in the first couple turns, right? So he's a 2/3 for 2. When he comes into play, he deals 1 damage to a random enemy. He can miss and hit your the enemy hero. You almost, for 1 damage from this guy, you almost never want him to hit the enemy hero. That's not what he's for. But so your opponent goes first and plays a 2/1. you coin him out, there's a 50-50 chance, not only is he already better than the 2-1, like he will win a fight against the 2-1, there's a 50-50 chance that he will just blow up the 2-1, in which case it's a huge win. And the same sort of thing happens if it's him against like another 2-3. There's a 50-50 chance that he will do the 1 damage to their 2-3, and suddenly he wins that fight instead of it being no winner. Pretty interesting like that. The Garrison Commander, who was like epic, he just gives you, he's a solid 2-3 for 2. He gives you the ability to use your hero power twice per turn. Now, it's still going to cost you twice as much mana if you want to use it twice. But you can imagine with all the Inspire abilities out here, there are a lot of things where being able to do it twice would be craziness. Especially some of the more high-end things. There are a lot of sort of 6 mana minions that have a 5 or 6 mana, that have a crazy Inspire. If you already had him in play, he didn't die for some reason, and then on turn 10 you play like 6 mana guy with a crazy Inspire, and then use your ability twice, so you draw 2 cards, or make 2, whatever their Inspire does, make 2 Kodos out of nowhere. That's pretty good stuff. And again, the drawback, there's no real drawback to including him in your deck, other than a very limited deck size. As a 2-3 for 2, he's a pretty solid early game play. The Lance Carrier, a lot of people think is just like totally replace the 2-1, the Abusive Sergeant. I would say they're different, but Lance Carrier is definitely very cool. He's a 1-2 for 2. His stats are crap. Loses all deals. There is almost no situation where he is winning against other 2-mana minions. Just virtually none. But his battle cry permanently gives a friendly minion +2 attack. So that's nice. Now that is very cool, and it means whatever he gives that buff to, your opponent's going to want to get rid of. He is another body in play if you have things that buff different minions and stuff like that. So he's good from that perspective. But again, his own stats are pretty worthless relative to his cost, or actually pretty worthless anyway. There's a big difference between 1 and 2 damage. The Abusive Sergeant is as good as him in a lot of circumstances, actually better than him in some circumstances. He costs only 1. Sometimes there's a big difference between 1 and 2 mana. Sometimes not as much late in the game, but a 2-1 for 1 is like 2-1 is better stats. Even for 2 mana, 2-1 would be better stats under most circumstances. It is annoying when you're against like a mage or something and they can easily blow up your guy, but the 2-1 is almost always better. And is definitely better as like a first turn play. Even if there's nothing to buff, you play him first turn, he's got an okay chance that he can win a trade against your opponent's 2-mana minion that they coin out. Or at least he's forcing him to change which minion they put out. So that, because they can't play that 3-2 now, he would just kill it. But the real crux is, give a friendly minion +2 attack permanently is awesome. But you're going to find a lot of the time what you're using it for is to buff a weak minion so you can trade it to kill an opponent's better minion. If you're doing that, the bonus is really temporary, and that's what Abusive Sergeant was doing all along anyway. That's the majority of what you use the Abusive Sergeant for, is to let a smaller minion kill a bigger one. Now, you're going to try and use this guy differently because it's permanent. You're going to value it very differently. But often that's going to be the most useful play, in which case you could have just used an Abusive Sergeant. He's got probably more useful stats, and he's cheaper. So I'm not downplaying that this guy is awesome. That +2 attack is amazing if you put it on something that you can protect that's not going to die right away. If you put that on something that can't be the target of spells and hero abilities, that's kick-ass. Give that bonus to like the Nullifier, your 2/5 taunt mech for 4. Now he's a 4/5 that can't be targeted except by battle cries. But I'm just saying, overall, if you think this guy totally replaces the Abusive Sergeant, you're not thinking about how the Abusive Sergeant actually works, and the Abusive Sergeant is actually still really good. But yeah, Lance Carrier is also pretty cool. Argent Horse Rider is pretty solid, right? He's a 2-1 charge Divine Shield for 3. So obviously you're comparing him to the Bluegill Murloc, which costs 1 less. It's just a 2-1 charge. It charges, and if you're using it to kill a minion, it dies. Or you're comparing it to the stupid orc guy, who is a 3-1 charge for 3. Whatever he hits, he's going to die, but he can kill something slightly bigger, or do 3 damage to your opponent, and then the opponent has to deal with him somehow. The Ardent Horse Rider is an interesting choice between them, because he's, for 1 more mana, he fights exactly like a bluegill, except he doesn't die. Whatever he hits the first time, he can do 2 damage to a minion and not die. He can do 2 damage to your opponent, and your opponent will probably still have to spend some reasonable amount of effort to get rid of him. Even if they have a deal 1 damage hero ability, that won't kill him. They have to do something else too, or use it 2 turns in a row, in which point he's definitely winning out. So he's pretty cool. He's also a very good target for buffs, right? For 4 mana, you can play him Blessing of Might. You have a 5/1 charge Divine Shield. Haha. Colosseum Manager, you got a 2/5 for 3. He's very weird. Every time you activate your hero ability, he returns to your hand. That is both an advantage and disadvantage. Largely disadvantage, but 2/5 for 3 is abnormally large stats, if only by a little and a little bit too defense focused. But the thing is, you can use him to hit an opposing minion, like kill an enemy 3/2, then use your hero ability, you get him back. This is slowing you down a lot mana-wise, because you're using the mana for your hero ability, and you're going to be using the mana to recast him later. So it's a slow strategy. It's a very expensive strategy in terms of mana and time. But it is very efficient for cards, because you can keep fighting with this guy and taking damage on him, and then keeping him alive. So there have got to be some other ways that you could take advantage of returning him to your hand. Not sure what those are. I mean, he's going to lose all his buffs and stuff, if he had any, which he probably doesn't, because you're expecting to return him to your hand. There are going to be times when you're going to be like, well, he's at full health. I don't want to return him to my hand, but I need to use my hero power. Okay, so he's interesting, though. He's definitely not just the guy you're going to get thrown in everywhere, but he has some value. Dragonhawk Rider is just like, I think, a much better version of the Raging Worgen. Sorry, Raging Worgen. Raging Worgen does increase his own attack when he takes damage. You trigger him, he's pretty rough. But this is a 3/3 for 3. It's just as fragile as him. But any class can just give him Wind Fury temporarily by inspiring, by just activating their hero power. That's often going to work out pretty well. It's not permanent Wind Fury. You don't feel quite as bad about trading him for stuff, like hit your opponent for 3 and then trade him to kill something. I don't know. I just feel like he's usually going to work out better than the Raging Worgen, even though the Raging Worgen is potentially super, super powerful, especially if you're a mage. You start getting into... I like how this expansion has some cheap legends. Now, in order to have cheap legends and still have them have good stats for the cost, what they've done is they've made them require a certain kind of play to get any value out of them. So she's a 3/4 for 3, which is not bad, but there are actually lots of 3/4 for 3s now. A fair number of them. Again, I really like that set configuration, but... So if you're in the wrong kind of deck, she's not going to do anything for you. But if you're in the right kind of deck, whenever you target her with a spell, she deals 3 damage to a random enemy minion. So if you're a deck that has minion buffs, she suddenly becomes a death machine. You're a priest, right? You play her, she's a 3/4 for 3. Okay. Next turn, you power word shield her. She gets tougher, deals 3 damage to a random enemy. It could hit the enemy hero, which, if you're doing it a bunch of times, starts to be okay. Or you could hit one of their minions for 3, which is awesome. And you made her tougher. You put Felon's Chosen on her. Now she's super, super tough, and you do another 3 damage randomly just as a bonus. It's fantastic. Paladin buffs, druid buffs. That is some serious beatdown that she lays down while being perfectly fine for the stats. I am probably going to craft both her and her sister. I'm skipping. I'll come back to the other guy. Because they're not quite adjacent, which is kind of funny. Because they're like twins. She's also a 3/4 for 3. She also only does anything when you target her with a spell. She gains Divine Shield. Now, with both of them, you could have spells that do damage to minions, like you could Mortal Coil them or something, or whatever, that's not usually going to work out very well. I mean, sometimes it may be worth doing a Mortal Coil to Idis and to do 3 damage at random, or Mortal Coil her because the 1 damage she takes is less than the Divine Shield she gets. But that does limit their usefulness in other decks. That's something you can do, that's not why you put them in your deck. You're putting them in your deck because you have buffs. But in her case, instead of doing damage, whenever she gets a buff, she gains Divine Shield. So, you don't want to cast a buff that gives Divine Shield. Unless your plan is to be the Paladin deck where you have the 3/3 guy who sucks off the Divine Shields and turns them into +3/+3 for himself. He loves her. They get along just fine. But no, if you play Blessing of Might on her, she gets +3/+3 and Divine Shield. She actually just got Blessing of Champions when you only paid for a Blessing of Might. Awesome. Now she can go kill something, loses her bubble, play another buff on her, anything, she gets back the Divine Shield. Blessing of Wisdom, she gets the Divine Shield. You probably wanted to do that before you attacked, actually. Either way, you can just keep giving her Divine Shield, which means she can do a whole lot of fighting and staying alive, whereas she does more immediately, usually, when you do her, but you can't target what you kill, which you can with her, and she is ultimately, they're both big target, right? But she's a lot easier to kill, because she doesn't have anything other than your buffs protecting her, whereas you can go totally offensive buffs on her and still give her a bubble all the time. There is the saving grace that she can't have more than 1 bubble at once. She can only attack once per turn, so it's very powerful, but you can't just, like, chain reaction, like, destroy your opponent. But you could have 3 buffs in your hand, and just like, well, I'm going to Divine Health, Divine double your hit points, deal 3 damage. I'm going to Felon's Chosen you, deal 3 damage. You got a lot of hit points. I probably should have done that in the other order, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to Inner Fire you, deal 3 damage, hit my opponent for, I don't know, 12 or something, and gone. Do it in the right order. But anyway, that's very good. The Ice Rager is kind of funny because we had the Magma Rager, which was garbage, as it acknowledges in his quote. The 5/1 for 3, not good. It's exactly like the Magma Rager, but with one more hit point. So, like, how much do we have to give this card before you start actually playing it? I think probably 1 hit point. I don't know where he fits into any constructed decks. I feel like he's probably good in the arena. The fact is, though, 5 attack for 3 mana is a horrendous amount of damage if he's unopposed for whatever reason. If you can eliminate the forces that oppose him so he gets to attack, he can kill something big, or he will just do a horrendous amount of damage to your opponent over several turns. And that extra hit point means he is not just trivially killed by garbage like whirlwind attacks, by like a third of the hero powers, although admittedly the mage kills him for free. For a rogue or a druid, killing him with your hero power still kind of sucks. But still, you trade crap minions for him. People will still trade crap minions to kill the Ice Rager. But that 1 extra hit point makes a big difference in how incredibly fragile he is, whereas he's just fairly fragile. Again, for 2 mana you get like a 3/2. For 3 mana you get a 5/2. That's not great. Not bad. I don't know if it's good enough that he will actually see play, but there is a much, much better chance than the Magma Rager, who anyone who does, like, sort of works it out is like, no, he's just terrible bad. We have Light's Champion. He was that guy I mentioned. He's the whatever hell, the pissed off guard's, like, best buddy, even though he hates demons. You play the Wrath Guard. You're 4/3 for 2 with a horrible drawback. Then next turn you play Light's Champion. He's a 4/3 for 3. Silences a demon. I'm going to silence the Wrathguard's horrible disadvantage. They're both happy. He got to do something to a demon, and the Wrathguard can now attack without you taking the damage. But yeah, so he's a hoser. He doesn't bother me quite the same as other hosers because the majority, like, most demons don't have anything worth silencing. It's like only about a third of them have a positive ability that is not a battle cry. I'm guessing. Not many of them have drawbacks either, so his ability to silence and get rid of a drawback is actually not as good as you would expect from demons. Most of their drawbacks are not while they're in play. They're just, like, battle cries. But I don't know, he's got okay stats. I don't think you'll see a whole lot of play. Because he's not powerful enough to be like a really powerful hoser, which is why I don't complain about him as much, but he's just Master of Ceremonies is a 4/2 for 3, not great stats, but she's a 6/4 for 3 if you have a minion with spell damage out. Problem, there are not that many inexpensive minions with spell damage. So yes, you can go Kobold Geomancer turn 2, turn 3, 6/4 Master of Ceremonies. There are not a whole lot of other situations that are going to generate that, and the Geomancer is probably not going to live that long. So yeah, I mean, getting a 6/4 for 3 mana is very good. Her requirement makes it a little bit iffy, I think, but maybe I'll be proven wrong. Maybe she's a powerhouse, I don't know. Saboteur is a 4/3 for 3, and, you know, that's okay. He makes your opponent's hero power cost +5 mana next turn. Which is very weird. Prior to this set, that would have been such a trivial penalty to your opponent. Why would you ever do what is this use? But again, 4/3 for 3 is not great stats, but he's not ever like worthless for his cost. He's at least sort of worth his cost, even if it's not configured the way I would like. But in this environment, they put him in case Inspire decks are getting out of control, so that pro players will have something that they can, I want to say sideboard in. You don't actually have sideboards in Hearthstone, to my knowledge, but you could, if you're worried about Inspire-type decks in the environment, you might consider playing him to, at a critical time, disrupt their Inspire-based combo. Like if the Mage is going, like, whatever hero 3/2 guy, and Maiden of the Lake, and then whip out the Koldara Drake, where you can use your ability any number of times per turn. If you could see that coming and do this, just so they can't do the combo that turn, that's pretty worthwhile. I'm assuming this overrides the Lady of the Lake, because if not, it'd be really stupid. So, Silent Knight, he's also an interesting fellow, apart from being kind of ironic to be like a knight who is stealth. But yeah, so you get a 2/2 for 3, but he has stealth and divine shield. So what he does is, you put him into play, he's just not going to die before he gets a chance to attack. If your opponent was killing a stealth divine shield guy before he could attack, probably anything you played would have died before it could attack. Like, he is very durable. And he's a very good target for buffs. Because you play him say you're a paladin, play him turn 3, he's going to not die. He's probably going to come out with a bubble. And then you played him, and you can now safely Blessing of Kings him, hit your opponent for 6, or kill one of their guys and use his bubble. Either way, he's going to live long enough to do that job and end up with his full hit points at the end. So he's pretty good in that way. I don't know how generally playable he is, but yeah. Silverhand Region's pretty cool. 3/3 for 3, Inspire, summon a 1/1. So if you're a paladin, your hero ability does double. But if you're not a paladin, your hero ability also does the paladin hero ability. That's pretty cool. I think she's efficient enough for the cost, right? For 5 mana, you could play her, use her, you got a 3/3 and a 1/1, and whatever your hero ability did. And if she lives longer, you use your hero ability again, you get more guys. So, she's pretty good. The Armored Warhorse is very strange, right? 5/3 for 4's meh sort of stats, just because it's a ranged Batman, because it's so fragile. A 5/3 charge for 4, super powerful. But what about a 5/3 charge that's only charge half the time? Because you have to joust to get that charge. He's also a beast, which might help for some things. But the problem with him is, like, if when you drew him, he did the joust. So he was a 5/3 for 4. Half the time he would have charge, and half the time he would not. But you knew when he was in your hand, I would say he was a super powerful minion, because if he had charged, you would use him like a charge minion. You would play him, kill the enemy minion with 5 hit points or less, or you'd use him as a finisher. And then if he didn't have charge, then you would just play him differently. You try and sort of play him in a situation where you had the board cleared, so he was less likely to just die, and whatever. The problem is, you don't know whether or not he has charge when you pay that mana. He's fragile. If you played him because you needed him to charge something and he doesn't, not only are you losing out on that, but he's probably just going to get killed by some chump. Or maybe it's too late and you lost the game because of it. If you play him when you don't need the charge, it's a bonus. Okay, but it's just that when you decide whether or not to play him, not knowing if he has charge is a real weakness. Where otherwise, again, I think he would be probably overpowered if he did the joust when you drew him, so you knew whether or not he'd have charge. The fact that it's random when you play him at that critical moment is what makes him not necessarily as strong as you might seem. Crowd favorite, he's a 4/4. Whenever you play a card with Battlecry, gain +1/+1. So I kind of compare him to that Shaman guy, right? 4/4 for 4. She has a Battlecry where she gets +1/+1 for every totem you currently have, which does mean that you get, you're going to get a 5/5 or a 6/6 for 4 mana almost always. He has the potential to grow from like half of your minions. Even if you're not trying, you probably have like a buttload of Battlecry minions in your deck. But he does come into play as just a 4/4, so until you can play some other cards, he's not getting that bonus. So he's a little bit fragile, a little bit vulnerable initially, but he has the potential to grow much larger. So he's pretty interesting. Evil Heckler, of course, Booty Bay Bodyguard will just no longer be played ever, because it was bad. The 5/4 taunt for 5 was not good, because it was a bad arrangement of stats for a taunt minion. Suddenly, though, when it's a 5/4 taunt for 4, this is like 9 points for 4 mana is pretty good with no abilities. With taunt doesn't suit his stats very well. Like if he was a 3/6 taunt for 4, he would be brutal with the same total stats. 5/4 taunt for 4, not as good. But a 5/4 for 4 was a fair cost for a minion. With taunt, he's actually excellent value. So we have the Frigid Snowballed. You can now get a Kobold Geomancer where you pay 2 more mana and he has 4 more hit points. So as a spell damage guy, having a lot more hit points is good. He's much more durable. He will stick around and provide you spell damage for more than the turn in which you played him. At 4 cost, he's better than some of the other options. Like I don't like that 4/7 guy who looks like Nightcrawler from the X-Men. He's not a winner. Too expensive for your spell damage, and just that's But a 2/6 for 4, if what you want is spell damage, you want to have that spell damage stick around so you can use it multiple turns, this guy's pretty good, and he's cheap enough that later in the game you can still play him and play a spell to immediately take advantage of it. So that's pretty interesting. We have Gormok the Impaler, another cheap legend. He's a 4/4 for 4, so he has pretty okay stats for his cost. But as a cheap legend with no drawback, what they've done is they've made his actual benefit very conditional. So he has a Battlecry that deals 4 damage, but it will only trigger if you have at least 4 minions other than him. So you can see how if you just throw him in a normal deck, he is most of the time just going to be a 4/4 for 4. He is not going to be worth his legendariness. So really, you could design a deck that will almost always get to take advantage of him, or just like very frequently, by putting in all kinds of things that give you extra minions, more than one minion per card, and Spider, and your Tide Hunters. There are all kinds of things you can do to engineer having more minions in play. But then he's only a legend, so you're only going to have 1 copy out of your 30 cards. You don't want to design the deck for that. So really, he's only going to go in decks that were already doing that for other reasons, to get Bloodlust kills, or Roar Druids, buff all your guy Druids. But he's interesting. He kind of enhances that playstyle, and he is pretty cool if you were going to make a deck that was going to try and generate a ton of minions for whatever purpose. Maiden of the Lake. She has the same stats as Frigid Snowballed. She's, again, 4 mana, but she's built for survivability. it's good that she has 2 attack instead of 1. There's a huge difference in the impact that a 2 attack minion has on a game as opposed to a 1 attack minion. 1 attack minions have a hard time killing even a lot of crappy weenies, whereas she can kill that like 3/2 raptor or whatever and survive. That works out okay, but mostly she's tough because she makes your hero power cost 1, which is only saving you 1 mana per turn if you're using your hero ability every turn. 1 mana per turn is pretty awesome. If your hero ability is good, that's good stuff. But of course, this is the set with Inspire, so you have a lot of cards that benefit more from using your hero ability every turn, and a few cards that let you use your hero ability more than once, like what's his 2/3 guy, the Garrison Commander. You can now, if you can use your hero ability twice per turn, having it cost 1 is a tremendous boon. Of course, if you have the Mage card, the Koldara Drake or whatever, where you can use your hero ability any number of times per turn, and you're a mage, suddenly you have a Magic the Gathering Fireball every turn. We're just like, every mana you pay deals 1 damage. Go. It's even better than that. But yeah, so she's a very interesting card. You're probably going to see a lot of her in decks that are trying to take advantage of the new environment with Inspire. I think she's good. She's definitely not like an all decks sort of thing. You've got to be using some Inspire, and probably you want to have other stuff that benefits, that gives you more uses of your hero ability to really make her worthwhile, in which case now she's like a combo who is very mediocre on her own, but with the combo she's strong. I don't know. She's cool though. She's a good addition to the game. Refreshment Vendor, not as good an addition to the game. He's just a big lame-o. He's a 3/5 for 4, which is perfectly good stats. Battlecry, restore 4 health to each hero. Well, you control when it happens. If you've taken damage early, then maybe it's overhealing your opponent if you've got a control-y deck where like they're already at full and you'd taken damage, but he's like a boring, not very interesting guy. The Tournament Medic, he's a 1/8 for 4, and whenever you use your hero power, restore 2 health to your hero. Not as good as turning every hero power into the priest ability, because priest healing other people is pretty relevant. But when you have him out as a warlock, your hero ability no longer hurts you. That's pretty cool. If you're anyone else, then you can regain health while doing it. Hell, if you're a warrior, you become quite a troll when every time you use your hero ability, you heal 2 health up to your maximum of 30 and gain 2 armor regardless of maximum. So, but here's the problem: as a 1/8, who's not taunt or anything, he is really not contributing much other than that. Yes, he's tough. He's going to sit out there. He's not going to die very easily. But yeah, I think he's probably going to see more use in priest decks that are trying to abuse all the healing benefit mechanics and, inner fire. He's a good inner fire target. But I don't know how much use you would see in general. I'm sure a lot of people will try him in Warlock decks. I don't know if pros would be using him in Warlock decks. But overall, you're not going to see him too much because 1 attack is so much less good than 2. If he was a 2/7, he would be a really, really good minion for most people because he would be around able to like fight some stuff. Anyway, so we have another dragon here, the 2/6 for 4. Battlecry, if you're holding a dragon, gain +1 attack and taunt. So 2/6 for 4 with no ability, not especially good. Although in your dragon deck you do need dragons to fill it in, and he's another mid-cost for a dragon. But you're playing a dragon deck, obviously. If you have another dragon when you play him, a 3/6 taunt for 4 is brutal. That is an effective taunt minion. That's enough damage that he's doing like a lot of damage or killing everything that attacks him, and he can take some beatings. So very strong in the pure dragon deck, kind of useless otherwise. Clockwork Knight, he's pretty strong. I think you're going to see him chosen a lot in the arena. He's a 5/5 for 5, which is fine. Battlecry, give a friendly mech +1/+1. You don't need too many mechs to make that worthwhile. You just need one guy in play, give him +1/+1, it's good. It's not like a crazy combo. He's not like super exciting or super powerful. He's just relatively efficient and good, I think. Here's the Kvaldir Raider, he's basically like the Watcher, like the Warlock Watcher Demon, for everyone. If you're a Warlock, when you use your hero ability, he gains +2/+2, just like the Watcher. If you're not a Warlock, he's still a 4/4 for 5, same as the Watcher, and when you use your hero ability, he gets +2/+2. So really, all the Watcher has going for it is it's a demon, whereas he has no type. And, of course, the Watcher, if you manage to take damage in some other way on your turn, the Watcher will also grow. Of course, if you have, well, there's a thing later on that can change your Warlock's hero ability to not deal damage, in which case your Watcher wouldn't work anymore, and he still would, but anyway. He's pretty good. Mookless Champion is interesting. I think he's a little bit more interesting in the arena, but I don't know if you have a deck that generates a ton of minions. You might think about it. He's a 4/3 for 5, not very big, but he's a beast. And every time you use your hero ability, he gives all your other minions +1/+1. So if you have a lot of minions out there, as a 7-mana play, you put out this 4/3, use your hero ability, and immediately give +1/+1 to all your minions you had in play, who hopefully can attack right away. So that's pretty sweet. And then, unlike a Stormwind Champion, who costs 7 mana and is slightly bigger than him, next turn you can use your hero ability and give them another +1/+1. It escalates. So, bleh. Also, the +1/+1 on them will stay after he dies, which is a good thing because he's a lot less tough than a Stormwind Champion. He's kind of cool, though. Nexus Champion Sarad. It's a 4/5 legend for 4. Every time you use your hero ability, he adds a random spell to your hand. Random spell card from any class. He's giving you a card every time you use your hero ability. That's pretty good. If you're a Warlock, you get 2 cards every time you use your hero ability, one of which is a random spell. Pit Fighter is kind of like the next step up Yeti, right? For 5 mana, you get a 5/6, which is pretty efficient stats for 5. I think she's good in the arena. And I think things have gotten bigger in the current climate to the point that I'm not sure a Yeti is that good anymore. She's maybe a little bit more useful in the arena than an actual Yeti at this stage. I think. Maybe I'm wrong. I think in practice there are enough good minions in the mid-range that you'd really rather have a guy with a good ability. So certainly it's not like you're going to see her in constructed decks, but she's a reasonable addition to the arena. The Recruiter is a 5/4 for 5, so meh. Every time you use your hero ability, he adds a 2/2 Squire to your hand. So that's really interesting. He's not putting a 2/2 into play, he's putting it into your hand, which is worse in most ways, but those 2/2 Squires, I'm pretty sure they only cost 1. It's the same Squire card that you get from the Silverhand Knight, right? So Silverhand, you pay 5 mana, you get a 4/4 and a 2/2 right away. This guy, you pay 5 mana, you get a 5/4, but every time you use your hero ability while he's alive, you get another 2/2 Squire in your hand. You still have to cast them for another 1 mana, but there might be ways to benefit from the fact that you're casting more minions, or you have more cards in your hand. I don't know. He's interesting, though. Bolf Ramshield, as we're getting into more legends here, he's a 3/9 for 6. He doesn't have taunt, but whenever your hero takes damage, he takes the damage instead. So, if your hero gets hit with a spell, he taunts away the damage from that spell. Now, he doesn't change how your enemy minions attack. They could go for him. But on the other hand, if you had a taunt minion out, it is protecting him, while he is protecting your hero from spells and other sources of damage. So, yeah. He's got the right stats for the job. He does enough damage to be worthwhile for that, while being very tough. Of course, you could be buffing or healing him as a priest. You could inner fire him. You could double his health. You could do all kinds of things. He's interesting. I don't know if he's actually super overpowered or something compared to just like putting out a taunt or whatever. But yeah, he's interesting. Grand Crusader is a weird card. It's a 5/5 for 6. Okay. That gives you a random paladin card in your hand. So 5/5 for 6 and you draw a card. That's not bad. It's weird that it's a paladin card regardless of your class. Like, it makes sense for the theme, the tournament, and stuff like that. But that is a very weird effect to have. Then you have Just a Card True Heart. She's a 6/3 for 6, so those are very badly distributed stats. You'd much rather she was a 3/6, right? Because then she could kill things and survive. She does not survive anything, although I guess if you have the board clear and she can attack your opponent, she's going to take them down fast. Her battle cry replaces your starting hero power with a better version of the same power. Oh yeah. So, I thought she was bad when I first read her. Then I realized, no, that's a battle cry. She changes your hero power for the rest of the game. So even when she dies, it's not if, it's when. She has 3 hit points. So, she will already have done her job, which is to change your hero power. And I should have thought about it in advance and brought up the document which shows the pictures of them. But basically, if you're a hunter, she replaces your 2 damage shot with a 3 damage shot. If you're a mage, she replaces your 2 damage fire blast with your 1 damage fire blast with a 2 damage fire blast. So the mage is kind of winning there because the mage can do 2 damage to any target, whereas the hunter is still just doing it to the enemy hero. But they only gain 50% instead of doubling. But 3 damage every turn is a lot. 2 damage is already a lot. 3 damage every turn is a lot to deal to the enemy hero. If you're a warlock, she changes your ability to be just 2 mana, draw a card. It no longer hurts you for 2 every turn. That's pretty good. She changes the priest ability, is like 2 mana. I think it heals 4. The warrior ability is like 2 mana, gain 4 armor, I'm pretty sure. I should double check that. I could be wrong about that one. The paladin makes 2 1/1s instead of 1. No, it's not 2/2. It makes 2 1/1s. And the shaman changes their power. Instead of getting a random totem, the shaman just chooses a totem. If I want a taunt totem every turn, I'm going to get a taunt totem every turn. Oh, this turn spell damage would be more useful. So, that is pretty rough. And the rogue's ability, I think it changes it so that if you already have a weapon equipped, it gets +1 attack instead. I think it's still, I'd have to read it again. I don't know. You can look them up online. I should have posted it. I'll put a link down down below. So it's interesting the changes she makes are permanent, and you still get a 6/3 out of the deal. So I don't know. It's kind of like a long-term investment, but if you're playing around with all the healing effects with your priests, that 4-point heal every turn could do quite a lot. They're all pretty good, but I don't think she's like a real game changer. Look at the Kodo Rider. He's a 3/5 for 6. Whenever you use your hero ability, he summons a 3/5 Kodo. That is a 3/5 War Kodo. I don't know if the War Kodo is a beast. I'm going to guess it is. In which case, if you had the Rhino out, it would have charge. The charge Rhino who gives everyone charge, all beasts charge. I know if you have the War Song, whatever, Warrior 2/3 for 3 guy, she gives all your minions with 3 attack or less charge. War Kodos would have charge. So if you had a Garrison Commander out and 10 mana, you play Kodo Rider, armor up, get a 3/5 Kodo. Armor up again, get another 3/5 Kodo, and all 3 of them could attack if you had What's-Her-Name in play, which would be odd because she always dies. But yeah, he's very interesting in that way. I mean, his stats are not that good on his own, but just think of it like as an 8 mana play, you get 2 3/5s. Is that really what you want to spend 8 mana on? Probably not, but it's not bad, especially if he survives, you can get more of them later. And you got to use your hero power, out of the deal. Master Jouster is a 5/6 for 6. Not bad on the stats, like he's a little bit behind. But he jousts, and if he loses the joust, he got a 5/6 for 6. It's not great, but at least he's big enough. He's still contributing, right? You're not getting horribly shafted. If you win the joust, he gets Taunt and Divine Shield. He becomes a very powerful defensive minion. Very tough. That's good. Morgor's Champion is a dumbass. I don't know why this thing is rare. It's like a trash rare. An 8/5 for 6. With the Ogre drawback. So as one of my viewers pointed out in the comments, you can get a Boulder Fist Ogre for the same cost, 6 mana for a 6/7. Those are much better distributed stats because it still does tons of damage, but is not as fragile. This guy is super fragile for like 6. Well, I guess he's not super fragile for 6 mana, but still not as tough as you want. And the Boulder Fist has no drawback. He's not even a common card. He's basic. Everyone has him. This guy has the same stats, distributed worse, and with the Ogre drawback. It's just sad. Sideshow Spell Eater, also kind of sad. It's a 6/5 for 6. Her battle cry is to copy your opponent's hero power. Yeah, that's interesting, but it's definitely a sideshow. Like, what is the purpose of... Like, how often is it going to work out that you're going to get more advantage from the enemy hero power than the one that synergizes with the cards that are actually in your deck? Like, whatever. I guess if you don't like your class's hero power, but even then, she's an expensive, like, late-gamey sort of minion. It is permanent. If you don't like your rogue power and you wanted your opponent's power, even though you might run into another rogue, in which case it does nothing. But you really want to be able to steal that mage power sometimes, she'll do it, but eh. The Skeleton Knight is a legend. He's a 7/4 for 6. His stats are not distributed too well, unless he's immortal. He's not immortal. He's sort of immortal, but not really. He's so you have 7/4 for 6, very offense-oriented, a little fragile for the cost, but you know, pretty statty. His Death Rattle triggers a joust. If you win a joust, he just returns to your hand. So, half the time he doesn't really die, and you can just play him again. You don't know, though. I don't know. He's interesting. He could have some value. But, Capture Jormungandr, I am very fond of this thing for the arena. You know how I would always complain about, like, the Lava Hound or Magma Hound or Core Hound. Core Hound. It was a 9/5 for 7. It was like, that is a piece of crap. If it was a 5/9 for 7, it would be awesome. But as a 9/5, it's just fragile. It's going to die. Here's the 5/9 for 7. I'm going to take this guy like crazy in the arena. Because 5 damage is enough. It can kill even large mid-game sort of minions. That's still a lot of damage to hit your opponent for. But 9 is a horrendous amount of hit points. It's very hard to kill even for the casting cost. So this thing is just a very solid arena minion. It will win fights against other minions. You could kill 2 mid-sized minions and maybe even still be alive. Or you can just keep hitting your opponent for 5, and your opponent has to expend a lot of effort to kill this thing. So I'm very happy with it. Chilmaw, Dragon Legend. It's a 6/6 for 7. It's got Taunt. Okay, I forgot he had Taunt, so he's better than I gave him credit for. But he's a 6/6 Taunt for 7. That's actually pretty decent. Because his Death Rattle was a little iffy on. Like, if he didn't have Taunt, I thought he was actually kind of a trash legend. But, no, as a 6/6 Taunt for 7 is not bad, because you got the Death Rattle. If you're holding a dragon, when he dies, he deals 3 damage to all minions. So, he is a very powerful defensive force. If you have that, and your opponent doesn't know if you have the Death Rattle or not. So, you have that degree of control over your opponent in that they can't be sure what will happen. Maybe you don't have a dragon in your hand, but they have to play it as if you do, which could totally change how they do things and mess them up. Or they could say, I just have to go ahead without it, and then, oh, you do have the dragon! Oh, so much for their plans. 3 damage to all minions after they kill through the 6/6 Taunt. So, no, he's actually pretty cool. I was not giving him enough credit earlier, because I did not realize he had Taunt. Sky Captain Craig. Not Craig, like C-R-A-I-G. Crag, like a piratey way to spell and pronounce a rocky outcropping. I don't know. He's a 4/6 charge. Apparently the extra R's do nothing. 4/6 charge pirate for 7. That's not very good, but he costs 1 less for each friendly pirate in play. I don't know. How many pirates do you have to have out to make him good? I guess if you have 2 pirates out, then he has a 4/6 charge for 5. Which is pretty solid, because usually charge minions are fragile, and he's not. He can come out and kill something and still be alive. If you have 3 pirates out, he only costs 4 mana. That's very cheap, but it's hard to have 3 or more pirates in play. They've added some more over time. There are now finally enough that you might try and make a pirate deck, especially with Rogue. I don't think they're a huge powerhouse, though. I don't know. Have to see. I can't imagine him getting that much play. If I got him in a pack, I'd be like, really? You couldn't be like another legend? Speaking of another legend, Ice Howl. I don't think he's going to be too popular. Maybe I'm wrong. He has a 10/10 charge for 9, which sounds awesome until you realize he can't attack heroes. He has a 10/10 charge for 9. He will charge out and start killing enemy minions and not hit the enemy hero. Sorry. I can't figure out what he should really be doing with his life. Because if he could hit the enemy hero, he would be awesome. That's a lot of stats, and he's charged. So you pay 9 mana, you get to kill a minion right away. There is virtually no circumstance, other than like a taunt bubble, where you can't kill a minion right away with your 10/10 charge. And it should survive to kill another minion, or force your opponent to spend something to kill him. Maybe he can kill a minion every turn for 2 or 3 turns. So he's powerful in that regard. I just don't know, is he really that needed for any deck? Like, that's very expensive removal, and I don't know. Maybe you have ways to manipulate him. Then we have the North Sea Kraken, who seems almost like a better deal. He's not as tough as Ice Howl, and he doesn't charge. You pay 9 mana, he comes into play and deals 4 damage immediately. So if you were going to use Ice Howl to kill a mid-range creature, well, the Kraken might be able to do just that, and ignore your taunt bubble opponent. And then he's still a 9/7 who can attack the enemy hero, as opposed to the 10/10 who can't. And he's less than a 10/10 if you used him to kill an enemy minion, equivalent to the 4 damage. So I think you can make a pretty good argument that the common North Sea Kraken is actually better than Ice Howl. Ice Howl comes into play and does 0 damage to your opponent. The North Sea Kraken can come into play and deal 4 damage to your opponent. If that's what you need to kill him that turn, he can. Then we have, last but far from least, the Frost Giant, who is actually kind of a standout. He is certainly one of the best giants. He may be the best giant. It's hard to say. I mean, at some point it's pretty arbitrary, but he is one of my favorite giants. Possibly my favorite giant. 8/8, like all those giants. He costs 10, which is not bad, right? It's good for your giant costs 10 or less, so that you can always at least play him when you have max mana. Unlike certain mountain and clockwork giant pieces of crap. But his cost reducer, because all the giants are, that's what a giant is in Hearthstone. It's an 8/8 with a high casting cost, 10 or more, whose cost is reduced somehow. His cost goes down by 1 every time you use your hero power. Anytime you use your hero power. He can be in your hand, he can be in your deck. You haven't drawn him yet, and already he's getting cheaper every time you use your hero power. So, if you are playing an Inspire, if you're playing an Inspire sort of deck, or if you're a mage, or whatever, if you have a useful hero power, and especially if you have any Inspire stuff to make it more useful, you will probably have used your hero power 3 times by turn 7, which means if you draw him, he'd be an 8/8 for 7 mana. If you've used your hero power 4 times by turn 7, it's hard to use your hero power 4 times by turn 6, though you could, and then he'd be an 8/8 for 6. But those are sort of edge cases. You're going to try and get him at the perfect time, get him out as soon as possible. You spend a lot of effort to do that. It's not that big a deal. The big deal is if you draw him later in the game, and just through the normal course of things, or especially if you have Inspire stuff, you could easily draw him turn 10 or later and have him cost 5 or less because you've used your hero ability a whole bunch, which is pretty cool. So anyhow, that is the set. I feel like the cards in this set are individually more powerful. I think it's pretty obvious that they are individually, on average, more powerful than from any previous set. Although, I would say that the cards you get from the solo adventures and the cards from the Gnomes and Goblins set are probably more sort of core cards that you would use. Like if you were starting out now and you just had basic cards, like, oh, what cards should I go for? I think Gnomes and Goblins are probably the packs that I would focus on buying first. Maybe I'm wrong. You'd also want to get through the solo adventure stuff. But that's interesting because the fact is, individually, cards in this set are usually going to be a little bit stronger than the individual cards elsewhere. It's just that a lot of the synergies and stuff require you to have those previous other cards. So, that is the new expansion. I think it is a pretty exciting expansion. I'm a little bit worried about how they keep, like, increasing the pace of the game, although they put in a whole bunch of things in this set to encourage the use of more expensive minions. And we'll see if that works out, or if at like the tournament level, the pros are just like, rush burn, rush burn, rush burn, rush burn, and then you die. Which seems quite likely because, again, the ability to rush has been increased. There are a lot of rush minions that are still good late in the game. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of rushing. But we'll just have to see how it all works out for me in the arena next time. If you enjoyed this, please click the like button, or on your touchscreen, please lick the like button. Warning, licking the touchscreen is not recommended. And check out Tales from My D&D Campaign on youtube.com/Demonac.